Hello, I'm Martin Salgado, DevOps strategist for Broadcom, and I'm happy to be here today to present to you to help you understand how to achieve your DevOps CI/CD goals. Now, we all know testing is not a standalone activity. It's typically tied to a broader initiative like DevOps CI/CD. But what does everybody say? Testing is the biggest bottleneck in the pipeline. Some people even call it the necessary evil. So the real question is testing impeding or helping you achieve your DevOps CI/CD goals? In this presentation, we'll take a look on how to optimize your testing in order to meet those DevOps CI/CD goals. Excuse me. So from an industry perspective, the DORA metrics are key goals that many organizations are trying to meet when they're doing DevOps. It's a DORA report, the DevOps Research and Assessment Report. You can get it on an annual basis through Google. Basically, it's 33,000 professionals that are queried worldwide to gauge the level of maturity from a operational excellence, software delivery, and organizational performance. So the key metrics you see on the screen here are deployment frequency, which is your deployment cadence. How often are you deploying? Lead time for change. That's how long it takes you to deploy a change. Then you have time to restore. Your time to restore is the amount of time it takes you to restore or remediate an issue. And the last one is lead time, or actually change failure rate. Excuse me. The change failure rate is your percentage of deployments resulting in issues in production. Now, throughout this presentation, I'm going to refer to two key metrics. Lead time for change, that's your velocity. Keep that in mind. That is your velocity. Your lead time for change is basically the amount of time it takes you to go from code commit to code running in production. This is probably the one metric that we're all familiar with, that we're all trying to achieve. We want velocity. But this is one metric that many organizations are struggling to improve on. In fact, 88% of enterprises are between low and medium performers. And we've not seen an improvement for the last 3 years. So you can see organizations are struggling with this key metric. The second metric I'm going to refer to throughout my deck is the change failure rate. That is your quality. Keep that in mind. Okay? This percentage of deployments resulting in issues in production. That could be a service outage. That could be a customer experience degradation. That could be a performance hit. Whatever results in a remediation. This is another metric that organizations are struggling to improve on, but we have seen a slight improvement. That slight improvement was between 2021 and 2022. We saw low, medium performers go from 46 to 60% CFR to 16 to 30% CFR. So it was a slight improvement, but again, both metrics organizations are struggling to meet. The key goal here is you want to reduce your lead time for change. This is how you gain velocity. And you want to reduce your change failure rate to improve your quality. Okay. So what does this all mean? Well, as we're trying to gain velocity, right, this is that one metric that everybody's trying to gain because we want to be first to market. We want to beat the competition. This is that one metric we know how to meet DevOps is we want to move quickly. We want to gain velocity. But guess what? As we're focused on velocity, quality typically suffers. And vice versa. As we're trying to gain quality or improve on quality, reduce your CFR, velocity suffers. The lead time for change goes up. So as you can see, organizations are struggling to balance both velocity, your lead time for change, and quality, your change failure rate. For example, in the financial sector, now by no means this is no financial company that I'm working with today, but we all know in the financial sector they're risk adverse. What does that result in? A low CFR, a low change failure rate. But when you dig in a little bit, you'll find out there's a huge overhead in the change approval process. In fact, one of my buddies who works for a financial company mentioned that they have a 3 to 4 week change approval process. So as you can imagine, that's simply impeding your lead time for change. Your velocity's getting a hit there. So you can see customers are struggling to balance the two. The key thing here to note is in order to balance the two, quality and velocity, your lead time for change and your change failure rate, is you need to reduce both lead time for change and your change failure rate without impeding one another. If there's anything you remember on this presentation, that is the note. That's the sentence to remember, is you need to reduce both without impeding one another. So what are some of the reasons why we see organizations struggling with balancing the two? I'm going to fill this out completely so you guys can take a look. Most of these we're probably already familiar with. Waste. Testing has become a huge wasteful activity. Why? Because our testing is not optimized. Many organizations are typically over-testing or they're under-testing, and they have gaps in their test coverage. Thank you. So they have gaps in their test coverage. You know, they're not focused on, they're only focused on one or the other. And that's typically the case because there's a disconnect between testing the activity and quality is the outcome. Right? Quality is an outcome that we recognize in production, which leads me to my next one, the high CFR, high change failure rate. Why are we seeing a high change failure rate? Because again, there's a big disconnect between testing the activity and quality is the outcome that's recognized in production. In fact, many developers have their own internal agenda, have their own internal goals. You know, whether that may be amount of test cases automated, or amount of test cases that passed, or maybe it's their code coverage, maybe it's the test coverage. Whatever it is, it's not aligned to the goal, which is quality. And that's typically the case because they don't have visibility to what's happening in production. Now, the last two, test environment health and test asset management, that's probably one we're all familiar with. As we think we're maturing, our environments are just getting more and more complex. We have more dependencies, we have more software, we have more applications. It becomes a nightmare to manage in regards to testing. Think about it. In the world of agility, if you have 100 builds a day, you're having to refresh your test environment 100 times. And then you have all the test asset management that goes with that. That can become a nightmare. So again, enterprises are struggling to balance velocity with quality. Excuse me. So we've come up with 3 key principles and 8 practices in order to transform your testing. The first one is shift left quality injection. Now, we've probably all heard the term shift left testing. We're probably all familiar with shift left testing. It's a term that was coined years ago. Still relevant, still applies. I'm talking about shift left to quality injection. What that means is we have to initially understand what our quality goals are. For example, right? If our quality goal is customer experience, then we need to ensure that we inject the right in testing activities relative to improving that customer experience. It's not all about simply doing extensive BDD and TDD, and yes, obviously that's going to help us get there. That's just a portion of it. It's really about aligning your testing activities with your quality goals. Okay? For example, doing early requirements validation. And all this activity, all this injection of quality should occur in the CI process. The second one is shift left all the toil. That's all the repetitive and non-valuable activity that occurs in the CD process. We need to automate as much as we possibly can and eliminate any manual intervention. So if we catch ourselves building test cases, building test data, building mocks, virtual services. In the CD cycle, we're simply impeding the lead time for change. We're slowing down velocity. All that work should have occurred in the CI process. Right? The CD process should be automating as quick as we possibly can get it. The third one is continuous failure tracking, continuous risk failure tracking and prediction. Because at the end of the day, it's really about the change failure rate, the quality and production. Right? It's not about simply doing test metric tracking and all the testing activities that go with it. It's really about tracking the risk of failure and aligning the right test cases or testing relative to that risk of failure. And that process should happen throughout the entire life cycle. And eventually, as we mature, we need to be able to predict the risk of failure, leveraging today's machine learning and AI technologies. So what does this get us? This gets us continuous quality and continuous flow. Continuous quality is a step above continuous testing. Again, that's another term we've probably heard. It's a step above continuous testing because continuous quality, we're injecting quality at every stage of the life cycle. Continuous flow and continuous flow of value throughout the entire life cycle. It's not simply about velocity, but it's also about minimizing the waste. So I have the 8 key practices on the screen here. And for the purpose of time, I'm going to cover one of these, relatively new actually. But if you'd like to dig into each of these practices, you actually can just scan the QR code where we have a blog written on every one of these practices. And it's actually a really good blog. So I'd encourage all of you to take a snap of that. The one I will be covering is change impact testing. Okay, I see one more camera. Okay, thank you. So the one I'm covering is change impact testing. Now there are 2 forms of change impact testing. There's inside out or white box testing, probably one we're all familiar with. This is the testing developers typically do, where they're focused on testing the application relative to their code changes. So they're just testing the changes in their code. It's great for the CI process, but it's not applicable to the higher stages of the testing pyramid, like end-to-end testing or UAT testing. The second change of impact testing is outside in, or black box testing, and it's testing the application relative to your requirements, relative to your requirement changes. Now, in order to achieve the best results, both approaches should be used. That's the only way to minimize your waste and your testing in the CI/CD cycle. And I typically say customers do one or the other. Again, in order for you to be successful, both approaches should be used. So what does this all really mean? In order to be truly continuous, everything must perform in a continuous manner. That means all your processes and your testing tools must perform in a continuous manner. In the context of Broadcom technologies, our solutions like service virtualization, test data management, Agile requirements designer, and continuous delivery director must also perform in a continuous manner. So I have next our two key customers. We'll go with Barclays and we'll follow by CVS. Well, they're going to discuss on how they're applying our solutions to their testing today. Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Good morning. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for the opportunity for me to share this with you. The journey of virtualization for me really is in two parts. I've done an interim part early on when I was working for a previous company, and now it's a maturity, if you like, where we're going next with Barclays. So, a bit about me. Who am I? I'm Paul Downing. I've done 30-odd years now in financial services IT, working across various functions, run the bank, build the bank, and currently I'm accountable for delivering pre-production environments, and particularly part of that is virtualization across that to see how that supports the continuous testing drive that we want to get to. And I've been working with SV for around about 10 years. So who are Barclays? Barclays, a UK-based bank with a global spread across all elements of it. We fit within the Barclays Execution Services, who deliver all the technology out to the various parts of the business. I sit within digital, helping deliver on that part at the moment. And one of the key focuses there and metrics really is delivering more for the customer. So key measure really is the uptake of the Barclays app. At the end of last year, 10.8 million customers are actively using it. Now it's just passed over, I believe, over 11 million. So let's take a look at SV. Why SV? Why did we look at it in the first place? And what are the problem statements around it? This is by no means an exhaustive list. You will have seen some of these examples before. Some may resonate, some may not. Some is new. The first one on there really is a bit of an old one. It's a, if you like, that's technical debt right there for me. So 10 years back when I started doing this, SV was all about trying to get away from projects that would just deliver more and more tin. Every project comes along, wants to buy its own server to feel comfortable doing their own thing. And that just led to proliferation of kit in data centers, and then you've got the maintenance and the ongoing of it as well. Nowadays, of course, we don't need to do that. We can say to people, we can give you a virtual environment. The second one on the list there really is key this week. I've heard many people speak about this, and I've been to a few sessions also about unavailability of test environments. That's a blocker right there. The instability of it, you're not sure whether it'll run. What can we do? Well, within that part of it, we identified the fact that quite often it's down to a lack of knowledge of what systems I'm running and what is the configuration of my end-to-end flow there. But again, SV, we can step in, we can plug the gap. The important thing to remember when you plug in the gap is that we don't actually fix things at that point. What we've incorporated into this is the ability to monitor some endpoints. If that fails, we can dynamically flip in, get the virtual component in and running. Tests can continue, but at the same time, we will raise a ticket to the component owner and say, at this point in time, this thing failed, you need to go and do something about it, and make sure that you deliver the root cause on the back of that. Other ones here, again, pick and mix really, scalable VPT environments. It's become very popular. Once upon a time, people would only fund a proportion of a production-like system and then extrapolate data and say, okay, we think it performs this way, it'll be good enough to put out live. Nowadays, we can help them actually scale it to production levels and beyond. And that's become something that a lot of people want to see. Data, key data. Again, there's been lots of discussions here this week around data. It takes a lot of time to produce the right data, especially in complex scenarios. And in finance in particular, we have scenarios where you have to look at age data over a period of time. What is someone's track record? What's their clientele like? We can get to the point where we haven't got to keep digging for data. We can reuse and reuse and reuse, making that a lot easier. That condenses your time to market. Third-party systems, this one's been around a long time now, and it's even more prevalent, isn't it? Now that everything's open banking, open everything, is that you want to be able to make sure that you can connect to other people's systems. Very easy, just spin up one and pretend it's there. You haven't got to wait for somebody to deliver that to you or make it available. And the bottom one really, I think, is, you can't hope to do the bottom one unless you've addressed some of the top ones. You need to get to a position where you have a stable environment that you can trust is always going to be available at the right level. Then you can run your automation. So how do we get to this position? Our journey really at Barclays now, 4 years plus, starting from a standing start really, is what key steps could I say to you, you might like to consider this? If you're leaving now and you're going on this journey and taking it, then what would you do? Well, this is what we did, and it may work for you. I hope some of it will resonate. At the outset, you want to establish, what is it I'm going to do? Where am I going to go? Why am I doing this? And build a quick win. I've been doing this for like 10 years now, and I stand here on stage and say, build something. I don't know what that is yet, but it has to mean something to you. Scope something that means something to you, that is tangible, that you can then go and sell. Because you're spending that first year doing a lot of walk and talk about, here's what I can do, here's the benefit, you can get benefit from it. At the same point, you really need to set up, what do I want to deliver that? A center of excellence. I've got to have some people that can do the build and do the push and do the delivery. So make sure you choose people that actually can come on board quickly, spin them up quickly, and start to move along. The next phase, years 2 to 3, this is where you really, really take off and you industrialize it, operationalize it. You can go at scale now. It's about growing outside your own domain. We started off in digital domain in Barclays, but then we grew across cards, the US, wherever we are. You start to think, okay, who else can get a good use case to us? Once people start hearing about what you're doing, they then come back and with another use case, another element might come and engage with you, another function picks up. Within that, we've got to grow the COE. So your center of excellence has to have the right skill set. You might have an AWS expert in there, you may have an SV expert in there, whatever you need. We've only got a small core team across Barclays, half a dozen people, but it works. Part of that delivery is also training. And we need to deliver the capability out to the teams that we're expecting to use this. So we adopted the train the trainer model. If we bring somebody in, ask them to bring a real life example in, and we will virtualize that solution in the training. It's far better than anything out of a book or a documentation or the product box. It means something to that person. So we train people, give them a real life example, they take that back into their place of work, and they're invested in it. It means something to them. And then they can demonstrate it to their co-workers, and they can spread that, and it goes even further. Running at scale was last year. It really, really took off for us. It's a super thing. Once it gets that critical mass and starts to roll, you end up with something that is production-like service. And the moment you realize it's on people's critical path is when your phone rings out of hours when something stopped working, and you think, hang on a minute, I've delivered something that people are now reliant on. They're enjoying it being there. So around that, you need to wrapper it with a kind of a service delivery feel, really. So it's a question of a support model. What hours will I work? Who's going to be available? Where is it? Have you got all the show and tell stuff that you did earlier on? Is it on your Confluence page or something similar where you've got videos of how-tos? You've got some good guidance and best practice that we want to see. And there's also on there anything that they need to engage with us. So how do I get an account pull? How do I get the product? Where do I get it internally? All the setup stuff needs to be absolutely seamless there. So you can just say, okay, thanks for your interest. Go here. Get everything you need, we'll get you up and running, and then we'll do the KT. The federated real rollout at the top of that really means that we end up with multiple COEs. We end up with people in different functions, all now doing it themselves, hands off. They'll only really come to us if there's an issue that they can't resolve. So that's it. Through those years, you can see the services have grown there. We've now got just shy of 4,000 services running across the bank, delivering quite a lot of capability. And how do we measure that capability? What does it mean at the end of the day? Because it'll mean different things to different people. How are you going to measure what it means in terms of your benefits in your area of work? Many of these you'll recognize really are just a flip of what we started out with. They were the constraints. These are the measures that go with those constraints. Saving time, saving costs on investing in tin. We're saving costs on resources maybe, or we're improving quality. They're all things that you can measure. It depends on what you want to deliver and tell to your stakeholders as to what's the benefit of doing this. Key one for us really is the chart we just grabbed there. It's a volume of transactions. It's a lovely one. It's a nice, easy one to say to people, this is the benefit we're giving to Barclays because we're accelerating the number of things that we can put through this that we couldn't have done before. We're either doing more or we're doing it smarter, and that's the good thing about it. So on that chart there, the left-hand one is 2019, about 4 million transactions went through. And the big orange one was last year at 277 million transactions. So that's, in total, we've just gone through 500 million transactions through SV. It's something that we couldn't have comprehended in terms of when we set out. And it's accelerating nicely. I mean, the right-hand one this year, we're almost at the level now with 2021, so we've got a way to go. So finally, where do we go next? Really, I talk to the team at Broadcom a lot about this, is where do we go next? It's, I want to mature it and be smarter with what we do. We're comfortable with what we can do with the product, and we're comfortable with the technologies. It's how do you work smarter in the enterprise to deliver better outcomes? The first one there is really all about hands-off. I want to go completely automated. I want to have an SV-only environment, spin it up, do some testing, spin it down. And we're aiming to try and get one of those done this year. The second one is really just with an add-on with a bit of SRE in terms of if I'm working in an integration environment with some physical, I'll also want to put in my ability to dynamically switch SV into there. So we can take a baseline, take a snapshot. If it's not right, I can flip in a component that I know is. And then we can carry on doing the testing and carry on getting the results. Hopefully I'll get an opportunity to come back and maybe talk about how that went. It would be really nice to say, actually, we took that on board and we went and did X, Y, and Z. But that's it. So that really is our journey so far at Barclays. So 4 years on, when we're doing okay. But hopefully you found that of interest. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ritesh. I've been with CVS for 15 years. And after the wonderful presentations that Paul and Martin just gave, I'll try to match them a little bit. Now, what I will do is I'll divide my presentation into 3 parts. First, why model-based testing? Second, what we have done with one of the tools that Broadcom has. It's called Agile Requirements Designer. And the third, what was the next step for it? How did we implement it into BDD and so on? So first, why model-based testing, right? So even after going to that conference next to us, looking at some awesome tools, I feel like the testing process, the testing activities haven't changed much, in last 30, 40 years, We still go through requirements, we still write the requirements, we still read them, we still develop our test cases, we review them, we find the data for it, we review it again, we execute it, and then, log defects, so on and so forth. So nothing has changed there. So for us, with model-based testing and adopting Agile Requirements Designer, we were able to automate most of this. So from the modeling the requirements to executing the test cases. And believe it or not, it might sound too good to be true, but it's not. We have actually implemented it. And I will talk a little bit on what ARD is. It's called Agile Requirements Designer. Now, you don't write your manual test cases, you don't review them. What you do is you actually model requirements or use cases in this case. You see a flow chart next to it, that's the model that will come out of when you are putting the model-based testing in effect. How is it different? Well, it's not just a flow chart. It has business logic behind it. It has conditions, it has data, and it has automation on those blocks that you see. And that is what makes it different. Once you develop the model, anything that you want to do. So, the first question is, do we have enough time to run through our functional scenarios? What is a functional scenario? It's 100% coverage of whatever you want to test. Right? Then there is regression, then there's a smoke, then there's unit testing and all that. This one particular model can give you all of that. It can give you 100% coverage, it can give you X number of scenarios or test cases. It can also trim it down and give you end-to-end scenarios for your regression testing. And it can even further trim it down for your smoke testing. It can all do, like one model can do it all. It has optimization. It can tell you, if you are choosing this particular optimization, you are getting 100% of coverage. you're getting 80% of coverage, or you're getting 500% of the coverage. What does that mean? Well, that means you are testing over and over the same stuff. Do you want to do that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? So when do you want to do over-testing? If there's an enhancement that comes in, right? A piece of functionality has changed. What do? In a traditional way, you go back, you look at the test cases, you review them, you find the test cases that, that impact that particular change, and then you test it. In this case, this model, you can identify what has changed. You can pin it and say, OK, I want all the scenarios that go through this particular block. If you want to focus on certain areas that you want to over-test, because that is a business critical area, you can do that. So that is the flexibility that ARD gives, which we absolutely love. You don't have to go through thousands of test cases with review, because most of the time, no one reviews them. You send 1,000 test cases to a developer with the time crunch he has, he probably won't go through all of them. You just thought, yeah, it looks good. But if you give this model to them, he will look into it and say, oh, yeah, this looks great. Maybe there's another condition we can add here, and so on. So that has helped us, with left shifting, what Paul and Martin just talked about. It has helped us in that regard. So there's a lot more to ARD, obviously, and I see the timer is 12 minutes to go, so I'll try to cover other things because we need some time for Q&A if there is. So all right, how we have implemented, so this is my third part, so how we have implemented ARD into BDD, right? So I go back to meeting of the minds, the three amigos, not the three amigos that just did the presentation. I'm talking about the developer, the tester, the product owner, or the business owner. When they come together, what do? They discuss, this is what we want to develop. How do we develop it? And then is it doing what it's supposed to do? How do we test it? And so on, right? So those are the three amigos that participate. What happens in a BDD development, BDD framework? The three amigos come in. They find out, OK, this is the feature. This is the requirements that we are trying to test. They come up with n number of scenarios and so on. They write it down, right? And then that's your feature file, right? What is the difference that we have done by implementing ARD? I'll just go over it. So the primary challenges that we face is obviously there's a lot of manual intervention by doing this, right? So you have to review it, whether the requirements written correctly, whether the features were correctly identified, whether the scenarios are like 100% coverage and all that, right? So all that comes into play. Not sure if we are 100%, covering everything in our testing. What we have done is same thing. The three amigos come together. They discuss everything. But instead of writing it down, we develop this model, right? So now I talked about ARD and its various features. It also has automation layer into it, and which is actually tool agnostic. So it doesn't matter which tool, what you're trying to automate, whether it's Selenium or Cucumber, whatever automation tool that you're using, ARD can actually generate the code for it. By using its automation layer. And what we have done is once you develop this ARD model, instead of writing the feature file, it automatically generates the Gherkin feature file for you. Take it as an input, take it away, automate it, step definition, and so on. So that is how we have implemented ARD at CVS. And with that, any questions or anything? We wanted to keep it 10 minutes for the Q&A. So Paul, if you want to come over, not sure where Martin is. Martin? Right. OK. Any questions? Anyone? We were doing manual, right? So we were writing the test cases. So it was not model-based. Before ARD, we were not doing model-based testing. So this is where we implemented model-based testing at CVS. Excellent question. It wasn't easy, I would say. But once we got it, everyone liked it to a point that some of the testers that we have, they don't want to write manual test cases anymore. They want to model. The path is not that easy, but you have to invest your time and effort because it is a tool where you need proper training. You need to understand the inside out of the tool. We've had some challenges at CVS too, where people just came in. They were thinking about test cases instead of business logic, business scenario. So you have to think about business scenario and not like writing test case in model, because you cannot write, okay, I'm going to start here, but then I'm just going to go down saying, click here, enter this. That is not your model, right? Because then you're just writing test case. So you have to think about business logic. What are you trying to test, and then develop your model accordingly. The model itself will give you test cases, right? So, that mentality of thinking scenarios instead of thinking test cases was the most difficult. But once we got it, it was easy. Of a model?
Yeah. So I can,
Okay, go ahead.
So example, maybe like customer journey. What's the journey your customer takes? Maybe it's on the .com and right, it hits all these backend systems. You can model that in ARD. And the beauty in ARD, you can break that into sub-flows. So you can break it down into, okay, here's the authentication process. Here's the, whatever it may be. So you can break it down. And the beauty of doing building out those models, as Ritesh was saying, is it automatically tells you what test cases you need to give you maximum coverage. So if you want 100% coverage, it's automatically going to tell you what those test cases are. You think about it today. You read the requirements. Your perception of a requirement may be different from what the business analyst or the business user was intending to write. So now you're already disconnected there. But once you model it out, the beauty of having that picture is you can go back to the business user and say, is this what you intended to produce?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Excellent. Then these are the test cases that I have to give me full coverage. And then you can optimize those test cases based upon the stages of the testing. So you can get more precise on the testing on the lower levels and get looser as you go up. Because your coverage should be maximized at the CI process as you're moving closer. Because think about it. If something doesn't scale in the development stage, it's not going to scale in pre-prod and production. So ideally is you want to find those issues in the development stage where it's cheaper to refactor that code.
You also have an option of building like reusable functions, right? So what he just said about subflows, that is your reusable, right? So if there is a functionality of your application that is being called more than once, you create a model, you create a subflow out of it, and then you can just plug into any other model that you have which calls that functionality. So it's drag and drop, right? So you don't have to do anything else. So that's how you would address. And then once you've put in the automation layer, it would generate that code.
So I have a customer local to where I'm at. He worked for this particular team, completely manual testing. And they have this initiative to go completely automated. They didn't know where to start. They've been struggling to deal with automation for years. Like, how do we start with this? We brought in ARD. Now they're the first team throughout the organization that's completely automated. Yes, and now it's actually scaling out because they see the value of ARD. Model out the requirements, whether your user stories, right? Whatever it may be, your user stories, your features, your epics, you model those out. By being able to model it out, systematically, we can tell you these are the test cases you need for the coverage you're looking to get.
Just mindful of time, we've got a couple of more questions over there.
You mentioned that
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So that's basically what we're talking about is you can set the level of coverage that you desire. So maximum coverage to minimal coverage, still giving you 100% coverage. Ideally, you want 100% coverage with a minimal amount of test cases, right? You're eliminating that waste that I was referring to earlier, right? Because many organizations, think about when you're reading the requirement, you think, oh, I need these 20 test cases. When in fact, you're probably over-testing or maybe under-testing.
Yeah, it has a lot of optimization features that you can, maybe if you're not sure how much you want, you can start low and then always add on to it till you get to 100, till you get to 80, whatever it is. Risk-based testing can be addressed like that.
There you go.
So there's a lot that you can do with the optimization it has.
And does it support any other, like it generates plugins or does it support anything else as well? Like any other thing like ARD or?
Yes, it's agnostic to whatever automation tool you want to use.
Yep.
I think we had a question over here. I'm sorry. Did you have a question?
I did, but.
Oh, were you? I'm sorry.
If we time out, we can speak
Are you on the same
after,
team?
it's okay.
Yeah, so we're all striving towards incremental testing and we want to get a test as soon as possible and one aspect of it is to test API, the endpoints before we go to the UI. So how do we implement that with the ARD? Like do you have plugins to like maybe Postman or some other tools that you can use?
So in this case, you would model out your API, right? So model out the functionality of your API. So basically, when ARD, what you're doing is either modeling out your requirements or you're modeling out the functionality of your application. In this case, you're talking about APIs. Model out your API requirements. By being able to do so, it's going to quickly tell you these are the test cases you need. And then you get more mature, as Ratish was saying, then you layer the snippets of automation on top of each of those blocks. Because think about it. When you have to go script all these test cases to automate it, that's going to take a while. First, you got to identify what test cases you need. Then you want to script it out to automate. Once you've modeled it out and it tells you what test cases you need, now you add snippets of code at each box in your model. It's going to automatically create the automated test scripts as well for you. So it speeds up that process. But there is a mind shift. People aren't familiar with or used to. Yeah, people are used to modeling out. You get on the board and you're whiteboarding what you think the requirements are. Instead of doing it on the whiteboard, do it in ARD. By doing so, you automatically have your test cases, and then you start laying your automation on top of that.
So
We're out of
would it
time.
require like separate models for the API stuff or?
No, same model.
So we are just going to run that model when we have on the API stage and then move it on to React or
Correct.
UI or whatever.
So you can have a high-level model, so you can have your API, you can have your UI, all built into that one model, and then break it down to the subflows.
Yep. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So after you generate the automated test scripts, how are folks running those scripts? Are they still setting them up in CI/CD, and is there any level of parallelism?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so if you're using the model-based testing tool to generate the automated test scripts, where do the test scripts themselves run after they're generated?
So you want them actually built into the CI/CD engine. So ideally, you have an engine that's actually going to be executing those test cases in the CI process, right? There's a CI tool, there's so many out there. And in the CD process, you have a CD tool that actually will be executing those test cases for you.
But do you copy paste the code or you just have some embedded feature?
So it has a capability of combining your script into one scenario and then giving it out to you. Then you can execute it. Or if you want to break it down into smaller chunks, you can do that too.
No, we're running over slightly, but there's a couple of questions over here.
I was just curious, as a matter of practice, do you usually model this as just all the positive tests, or have you?
Oh no, everything.
Everything.
Yeah. So mostly when we talk about negative, there's mostly data related, and on those, so those can be incorporated right into the model, so it takes care of it.
So piggybacking on that question, when it auto-generates the test cases for you, say you have an API with 3 parameters, does the auto test generation
give you equivalence class partitioning for the parameters and combinatorial testing across those parameters, or that's something that you have to configure and build in?
When we build out the model, you're going to have those 3 different parameters built into that model.
Yes.
So it's going to tell you all the different permutations that you can take in that model.
Right, but like for the individual parameters themselves, right? So if I've got like some string parameter, do I need to define the equivalence partitions for that individual parameter so that the auto test generator knows
I see what you're saying.
the set of values that it needs for that parameter?
Yeah, if that's something you want to test, then yes, you'll build that into the model.
And then how does the model know about the state of the system, right? So if there's, like when we're testing an API, there's the value of the data that you can pass into the API, and then there's the value of the state of the system itself that you're operating on. Is that something that you have to make aware as you're building out the model somehow?
What's not aware of the actual system, but you actually, in the model, the beauty of ARD is not only can you build out your test cases, your test scripts, but you can tie the test data needed to drive your testing. So if it's A, B, C testing or whatever it may be, we don't care what's happening in the backend system. If the backend system is giving you D and that's a failure, it's going to catch that, right, as you're executing your test cases. So it's going to tell you, in the model, you're going to say, here's your A, here's your B, here's your C path. If I get a D, then whatever the model is built to do, it's going to tell you could be a failure for that matter, or it could be a retry.
So in the example where I need to run the same test case on data in the system in 2 different states,
You would build that in the model.
based on
If you need to test those 2 different states, then you build that into the model. Yeah.
Okay.
Good questions, everybody.
Right.
I have a question.
Yep.
Yes or no?
Yes or no?
Yes or no?
Yes, maybe. No.
So you're building the model at the parameter session?
That's correct. That's correct.
And we have a booth. The Broadcom does have a booth. I forgot to mention that in my presentation.
Hey.
If you want to learn more, we actually have demos, ARD demos, TDM-SV in the Broadcom booth over here in the exhibition room.
Yeah.
So I would come looking for us.
Yeah.
Those are the actual practitioners. Those are the guys actually working with my customers, building out models, building out virtual services, test data, all that. And keep in mind, ARD becomes your source of truth. You tie your services, your virtual services, your test data dependencies are all tied into a model, right, along with the test cases and test scripts. So you know exactly what you need. That's the beauty of the model. Any limitations? That's a tough question. It doesn't serve you coffee. Bad joke.
But
Bad joke.
it can develop a model to make a coffee.
There you go. There you go. Right. You can build a model to say, what does it take to make a coffee?
That's right.
Okay.
I don't know. That's a good question. Ritesh, have you guys hit any limitations?
Not that I can remember. But, we did have a lot of difficulties, and with the help of Broadcom and internal, architects that we have, we were able to overcome this. So, any particular area that you are looking for, like, whether automation, modeling itself, and so on, like, the first challenge was to model correctly. I think that was the biggest challenge. We got over that. And then, so we faced a lot of difficulties. We overcame that. I do not know about any limitations as yes, based on what we use it for. So, okay. All right. Thank you.
Come see us in the booth. Maybe you get a nice little demo.
Yeah.
I would come see us in the booth. And, because once you get a look at it and what it does and how it actually optimizes your test cases, that's a beautiful thing.
So, is it, have you limited the manual testers since you implemented this? Or have you trained the manual QA testers who have to duplicate? So my understanding is that most of this stuff is doing.
Well, your manual testers could then be modeling out, right? So now they have more time to do things that matter to the business, right? So maybe it takes them weeks to identify what test cases based on the requirements now may take them, a few days, and now they can, now they're actually being more agile and they can move on to the next thing.
So I think we added this skill to our manual testers. So we had them go through some trainings and all that. We had some internal sessions and all that. So we built a community of practice just for ARD, and now all of them are actually modeling. It helps with the review process. There's a lot of benefits. I think we can talk about it later on, like in the, but all right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that it? Anybody else? I know we're over.
This is probably for Paul, maybe. I saw some notes about optimization of environments and like having multiple environments. How did this tool or Broadcom help with that and data? Like we have like terabytes of data.
It helps us. It's elimination of waste again, really. It means that rather than proliferate a copy of a known good test database or a test bed of some sort, and we initially had 26 of those, people were just making more and more copies. Is by spinning this up for each area, you've just got your own virtual environment. And you can actually then get rid of any of that other kit that you once had. You haven't got the maintenance of it, you haven't got the infrastructure, there's no cost associated with that, and you get the flexibility also. So we really give each area that comes to us with that requirement, say, do you want to have a spin up your own AWS instance? You can create your own VSEs on there, and you can carry on building out your own virtual environments purely doing that, rather than replicating these multiple physical environments that we've always had over the years. So that's what I meant by optimization. It's reducing waste really, but making it totally flexible for you on an SV side of things.
So is it like a Citrix type of a structure that it creates, so we need to put in a model and it creates?
No, all you've got to do really from that point of view is, if you're taking a server, wherever your server may be, on there, we'll load the software, we'll create it, we'll create the portal, you can give you all the connections, we can spin up the databases. All you then get is a user account to say that's yours. You can log into there, generate your services, deploy them, execute them, do whatever you wish. But that then becomes how you want to create your environment. Your environment may be a handful of APIs on there, or it may be a big number of services. But it's up to you how you replicate what was once an end-to-end physical environment. And the beauty of that is that actually you realize that you don't need half of that stuff anyway. You actually want this bit. You can focus on the system under test and just say, actually, with just a handful of services, I can replicate enough of that environment to do the testing I need to do. And that's what I meant by the optimization. It brings it right down to the actual core of what do I actually need in order to satisfy my tests.
Right.
Yeah.
And by virtualizing those endpoints, like Paul was mentioning, you have complete control and predictability of what you're testing now. So if you want to do negative testing, if you want to do chaos testing, you have that beauty of doing that. I mean, when you're testing against a live system, you're really at the mercy of the state of that live system. I want to do negative testing, but I can't simulate that. How do I simulate a mainframe going down? I know the mainframe rarely goes down, but I've seen it go down before. Yeah. That's a scenario that you can actually test with service virtualization.
It is, and the beauty of it, we refer to it really as an ongoing sandbox, because it's yours. You can play with that, and it just doesn't matter if you break it. You can literally do whatever you want and bring it back up, try again. And you wouldn't want to do that. And if you were doing an end-to-end test environment where other people are in that environment, you risk of taking everybody else out with you. And the whole reason we tried to encapsulate it was to give you the space to go and do whatever you want. And as Martin says, it's really up to you. Yeah.
I mean, Heroku has gone down 5 times in the past year.
So it's a scenario that we should be testing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Well done.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you.